Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. And welcome, everyone, to our fourth and final preview stream for the Corsairs of Umbar expansion pack. Today, we're going to go down through the Cape of Umbar, as well as run around in the city itself. Just as a reminder, this is an in-development build. The Cape of Umbar and the city are the areas where we are most actively doing our work right now. So you're going to see some things that don't look quite complete, towns and villages that aren't populated, some landscape that hasn't had its finishing touches done yet. But you'll be able to kind of get a sense for what we're going for with building this landscape. So welcome, everyone. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this kind of stream, this is a world design focused stream. That means that I'll be happy to answer any questions and discuss with you things regarding what goes into building the world, the factual physical world of Lord of the Rings Online. Things like landscapes, building dungeon spaces, how we make these sunsets so pretty. Those sorts of things are what we are going to be talking about. I'm not going to be talking about things like balance, PVMP, instance design, lag, any of those things. Those are topics that are better suited for people in those more specific departments. But if you have questions about the world design of Lord of the Rings, not even specifically related to Umbar and the Corsairs of Umbar itself, but just the world in general, I'm happy to answer them as best I can. So before I get going, let's just see if there's any questions to start things off. Important questions. Will stars be strange at night? I don't know the answer to that right now. It was actually something that I've been meaning to have a conversation with some folks about if we want to change and how we want to change the stars. We'll probably want to, but it's not something that we have done quite yet, as far as I understand. So yeah, it's actually, the sun is setting a little bit faster than I wanted it to, so I'm going to get our game time set up right here so that we're kind of in the middle of the day. So we have landed right now on the Cape of Umbar. This is what what players will see as their first touchdown in the region if they are following the storyline. You can see off in the distance here, and you can even see a little bit over there. That's the village of, or the little outpost of Bel Inzul, which players kind of finish their experience on the Shield Isles from. And then you can take a boat over here to the town of Jax-Fanal, which is what we're looking at right now. You can get a little bit of a view of the coast. One of the great things about this expansion pack is we are getting so many awesome new trees and getting to play, and new terrain textures, and just getting to play around in a setting that we've never really been able to touch, a kind of environment that we've never really been able to touch before in Lord of the Rings Online. You know, we've been very, very Eriador, Ravani, and Gondor focused through the entirety of what we've been building, so we haven't gotten to these more tropical spaces. We've dabbled a little bit in, deciduous rainforests and whatnot, the dense forest spaces of things like Fangorn and whatnot, that do have a little bit of a jungle vibe to them, but nothing as overtly tropical as what we're seeing here, which is great. It's different, it's new. I know often we have, whenever we release an update and go to a new region, there's always comments and conversations from people being like, oh, well, you didn't make new assets, you just changed the colors on things, or the textures of things. And in the case here, we really did go very, very heavy on new assets. I'm looking at these doors. These doors are a bit tall, so we might want to have Art look at those. But yeah, so let's see. We'll take a look at a couple of questions before I continue on through Jax-Fanal. Question from Do: when you are creating a new land, do you ever get the opinions of not only people in SSG, but other people or world builders in other companies or past Turbine Lotro world builders? For example, in my work, I still sometimes ask my mentor what he thinks of something I made, even though he is now retired. Um, so we don't always, we don't typically reach out to people too much outside of the company. There are a couple of resources that we have that are people that are under NDA that our lore masters, for example, kind of reach out to see if they can pick their brains on things, and usually most of the like internal conferencing that happens about like what we're building and who we're looking for, what we're looking for input and whatnot, either comes internally through those couple of NDA bound resources, or even just through working with our licensor. Very often we come up with our big ideas for what we want to do, and then interact with our licensor about it and make sure that what we're doing feels good, and works within what the IP, what we want to do with the IP. Um, Avanar says the completion of Umbar as a place raises an interesting possibility. There have been talks of the possibility of more days of your stories outside of the main timeline. Now that Umbar exists, could we possibly go back a mere 50 years or so and join Aragorn as he raids Umbar in the service of Denethor's father and incurs the jealousy of Denethor himself, of course? I think we really, really liked the narrative direction that we were pushing with things like the Tales of Your region, like Azanul Bazaar. And I think if we find ourselves with an opportunity that makes sense to do those sorts of things, we will. I'm not sure that we have anything specifically in mind for those immediately, but those kinds of things are stuff that we have talked about. Softneck GR says, can you swim from the Shield Isles to this port? I don't think we are currently going to allow that. It is a fairly long distance. We do have, as a stretch goal for ourselves, we do have a interesting way that we hope to manage players kind of swimming out into the ocean waters too far that is thematically linked with this area. And so we'll hopefully be able to implement that, time allowed. Hey, Scenario 1 in general, since Mirkwood and Swanfleet, we have not seen many new elven elven content in the game. Does the team have any plans to actually do something for elves, given the focus for so many years now has been and still is only on the other three races? It feels as if the team has decided to send the elves west and stop creating for that race. Elves are a tricky people to develop content for, in large part because their story is one of decline. So it's hard to, and we have a sense of what the major elven strongholds remaining in Middle Earth are at the point of time that we are in. So there are bits and pieces here where we can dabble into it. We did that with Before the Shadow, with showing off, the ring forges in the past. We've touched on it. I'm not sure if there's any story associated with it, but at least thematically in Pinnith Galen, there are a number of elven ruins. But as far as telling stories with elves and elves being the focus, it's something that we've actually found a bit of a challenge for ourselves. To come up with something that didn't feel like it was really retreading the kinds of stories that we've already told with elves. I think one of the things we did do back when we were preparing for what our next, air quote, campaign was going to be, where we were going to go, is, we wanted to talk about how we can introduce elements of multiple cultures into the areas that we're working in. And one of the conversations was like, okay, we want to be able to find a way to incorporate elves into some of the stories that we're telling. Umbar, I believe, is fairly elf light. There may be some bits and pieces of story here and there that incorporate elves, but at least for the expansion pack, It is very Umbar focused and not at all elf focused. Um, Norbert says these water puddles look great. The water puddles are honestly one of my favorite new textures. I think I talked about it a little bit last week, and it's great too because um, it's just a texture with a really high specular gloss to it, but it does such a great job um, of portraying that kind of look and feel. I remember playing through one of the newer Assassin's Creed games, and they did something very similar to that, and it was just really, really like simple, practical effect that doesn't really require a lot of heavy graphical lifting to just really get the point across and make it feel great. Uh, Nicodrum asks, any new maps? There are no maps available yet for viewing. They are still in setup process. This build is also a couple days old. There were some changes recently that were made that weren't quite ready for preview streaming. So we opted to do this on an older build. Um, our hope and intention is that there will be maps available by the time we get to Bull previews. Um, I believe all of the artwork is complete. It's just a matter now of hooking them up and setting them up into the UI. Iwanar says, and yet Umbar is also a Numenorian culture, so there ought to be common elements with Gondor and Arnor stuff. And that's true. We do have some of the bigger, more impressive stone structures are Gondorian, Numenorian in their base. With texture, coloration appropriate to the area, but definitely calling back to those areas that we've been before. So there's that little bit of familiarity. But the hope is that between the coloration and the other new buildings and structures that we're introducing as part of this expansion pack, that it's a good mixture and it doesn't feel like we're kind of retreading the spaces we've been before. So as you can see here, if you've ever been curious about what a city looks like that has not been populated, you're looking at it right now. Boom. F3R94 asks, I know it's a bit recaded, but I need to ask, what will happen to weapon auras for instruments in the future? I can't answer that question for you. That is not a world design question. That is probably more a game systems or art question. So you'd be best off at asking those questions on the message boards or during one of Cordovan's streams. He may be able to help you find an answer for that. Similarly, Zeus Pawner, I cannot tell you anything about crafting because that is not my area of expertise, and I would prefer not to speak to something that I did not have a hand in developing. Soft Snake GR says, do any other game landscapes ever inspire you to make LOTRO's landscapes? Can you mention some of the games? Well, I think particularly for this area, a lot of our one of the major games that we kind of looked at as our homework for kind of more Mediterranean and tropical spaces was Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The setting was Greece and the Greek islands, so very, very similar to the look and feel of some of what we were attempting to do here. And so I think we always look at games, we look at movies, we look at television shows that evoke a similar look and feel and vibe to what we are working to produce ourselves, and then use those as kind of ideation points for us as we start to build our own things. Medros BR says, should we expect new epic battles? There aren't any epic battles associated with this expansion pack. I think in general the epic battle system is one that unless we were to kind of look at it and kind of do a holistic overhaul of it, it's probably not something that we're likely to circle back to. I mean, we intentionally introduced content to help players circumnavigate epic battles as part of the main storyline, just because of how onerous they can be. So, Do asks, question, when you first started world building on LOTRO, did you ever work on DDO as well? Is it much the same in regards to world building or completely different in all ways? Or do you do both? Do you have a say in what game you get to work on if you do both games? So I started working as a production artist on Asheron's Call way, way, way back 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. And then, well, it started as an intern working on Middle Earth Online in production art, and then became the production artist and art lead for Asheron's Call. And then started doing world design work for Lord of the Rings Online when it started into heavy development. And then from there, I've done a little bit of world design work for Dungeons and Dragons Online. I think it was like Kingswood, I think is what it was. And I did pre-production and world design work for Infinite Crisis. All different games, all different needs. There are certainly things that, having been so familiar with building landscapes for Lord of the Rings, weren't quite what was needed for building DDO. Like their gameplay is less about the open world and more about, more personalized adventure experiences. So, and I know that's changed a bit over the years, but when I first did a little bit of work there on that project, it was a little bit of a learning curve, just because where my expertise was and what the needs of the project were a little bit different. Sometimes we will bounce back and forth between projects if there's a considerable need for it. But generally, the resources, the design resources on one project are dedicated to that project. We don't often migrate between the two. It happens once in a while, but not too often. Let's see if I'll find a good spot for review, and then we'll go through a few more questions. You can see a portion of the city of Umbar in the very far distance there. That's, I believe, the Citadel. So Norbert asks, you said in previous streams that you weren't around when Gondor came out until the Grey Mountains. Now you have a bunch of new types of trees, buildings. Is there anything you would like to go back to any of these regions and implement something given the time? I don't think so. Right now, we're very forward-looking, building new spaces, whether that's what you see here or doing a fill-in-the-gap space. We're less, I think particularly once you get to Gondor, the like modern style of world design is really like well seated at that point, and there isn't really a need to kind of like go back and reimagine those regions, from Gondor forward, like there was for things like the Lone Lands and Breland and whatnot. Eglinel Indrendir asks, good answer, but what about areas like North and South Linden? Is it on the map? It is on the map, and you could compete, and could be a complete expansion focusing on aiding those elves sailing west. Are there really so many untapped areas? There are really so many untapped areas in Eriador that could be utilized. Yes, there is a lot of space in Eriador that can be utilized, and there's a lot of spaces in other portions of the landscape beyond Eriador as well. The issue is more so what Linden itself kind of represents in terms of what's going on with the story. We are moving in a landscape direction that is a very different physical direction from where Linden is. And it would be a hard swerve for us to take the stories that we're working on now and put a pause on something to really do a big like elf campaign in that area. I think we're more likely to find like places where we can, slot in stories for elves in the places that we're going, more so than building regions that are wholly dedicated to elf kind. Actually, let me get down to the water here. I really like the water that we've done here. We're going to be adding, so this area doesn't have it again because this is an older build. Things like the sea foam is missing, and we do have wave crashing in entities to help kind of liven things up. So let's see. Do asks, when you enter Tuckborough on the right side, I noticed a burnt black grass that has been there for some years. Do you want a ticket created for this and submit pictures on the forum? Anytime you see something that appears like it's a bug, it is encouraged that you submit a bug with it, with location. If you have screenshots that you can attach to it, that's great as well. The message boards are never a great place to report bugs. Like, certainly they can be used to bring our attentions to things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we will have the time or opportunity to scour the message boards and make note of every bug and comment that is made there. So reporting a bug is always a better option. So Alex Mers says, how did you decide what color the building for the new buildings in this new type of architecture? A lot of that was looking at different kinds of villages that were built in this style. Not necessarily regionally related, but finding villages across the world that kind of had that packed together row house kind of feel to it. The painted, I think it was the Painted Ladies in San Francisco, for example. Newfoundland has a lot of houses that are like this. Northern Europe has a few villages that have like these kinds of painted houses, and the Mediterranean also has a lot of like painted plaster houses. So using those as reference is kind of what we went into and what we leaned on when it came to thinking about what we wanted for the colors. And the nice thing about that base asset too is it's very easy for us to make new color variations if we want to. Let's see, as we scroll down through, let's see. Zeus Pawner asked, are there any open slots for someone to get hired? I believe we do have a couple of openings listed on our website. If it's something that anyone is interested in applying for, always take a look at the website and see what's available in terms of open positions. Not just in SSG specific, but I think that page links to Daybreak in general, what's open. Nanara says, reminds me of a question. Do you think we will ever get a draw distance extension option? So that is something that has been discussed, and I know there was an engineer that did some investigation into it to kind of increase the loading range of land blocks, because right now the base is a 3x3 range around the player, but like extending that. But that does come with a performance cost. You lose out on a lot of the efficiencies of things being unloaded from land blocks in terms of rendering. Norbert says, the water is great, lacks a bit of waves though. And that's one of the things we're working on in terms of polish. I was actually working on that before I had to pause that to build a dungeon for someone. So it's something that we're working on. I think we're at the point now where there are, the core of everything has been built, and now we're working on polishing things. Let's see. Oh, drink times. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. We're doing ginger beer and water today because I ran out of ginger ale. All right. As we run down here, so Adder Elm says, "Is the ambient sound different for this region? Parrots singing, maybe?" I believe there are plans for new ambient tracks. I'm not sure exactly what those are yet. I know we certainly have a ton of new music, and I know at least for the cityscapes there are ambient. There's ambient music as well that's being introduced as part of that. Um, Dan the Man says, "Is the team working on updating all of the older maps, i.e. Evendem that desperately needs a new map?" So maps we typically update when we visit a region for some purpose. So for example, the Trollshaws map got updated when we did the Angle of Methythel. The other maps surrounding Swanfleet and Cardolan got updated when we introduced Swanfleet and Cardolan. If we were to ever introduce something new to the Evendem map, that's when we would update that. I know we have a number of like Evendem, North Downs, Forest Hill. There are a lot of regions that have the older style of map that eventually we would like to update, but it is not on our radar to update unless we are actually like physically going to those locations. So what I'm going to do is we're going to actually go around the outskirts of the city before we go into it, just so that we can get a look at the lay of the land. You can kind of see what the playable spaces are around here, and then once we've done this, then we'll go in. I think one of the things that's cool here too is we have a lot of these kind of like markets and suburbs, I guess is the right word for them, out and around the city. And then you also have these kind of more arid, scrubby areas all around, um, all around as well. So let's see. It's hard to both run around in this and read questions. But we'll make our way up a little bit higher. I'll get to another vantage point and we can see what we can see of the city. Farview is not in, so you may have noticed like things like walls and whatnot popping in. That hasn't come in yet. We need to set those properties on things. So as you can see here, this is a somewhat empty area that we still need to finish polish on. This is north of the city. You can see, we'll get to a vantage point up here so you can see the ocean beyond. That's a fun jump. Is Yondershire part of the Shire or a separate land? It feels like both in the way. Was it ever talked about merging the two lands into one massive land, or was it not possible? So with Yondershire, because we wanted it to be a kind of distinct and discrete offering, we've treated it as from a technical standpoint, it is its own separate thing. It is the Yondershire. It is the kind of outer frontier boundaries of the Shire between it and Arid Lewin. It's very flavorfully related to the Shire, and I think we tried to reflect that both in how we built it and in the content that went in it. But from a technical standpoint, it's its own separate thing for a variety of purposes. All right. In addition to Mediterranean influences, are there any African or Middle Eastern influences to Umbar and eventually Harad? I've been honestly hoping to see aspects of these cultures represented in the new landscapes. So yes, there's certainly influences. We want to be very mindful as we're building things to not build direct analogs of real world cultures into these areas, in part because our team wants to be respectful of representation, and we don't want to misrepresent things or to very overtly overtly show a kind of more caricaturized version of certain cultures. We want to make sure that while we have influences, we are creating something that is distinct and unique, and something that um, isn't necessarily uh, beholden to the cultures that exist currently in the real world. So Soft Snake says, "Wow, I like the destroyed Mordorian structures." Yeah, so those are remnants of the cult of Sauron. Um, you know, they had, Sauron had a heavy influence in this region, and now that he is gone, there's a lot to think about in terms of how the people that were here under his sway are looking at the statuary, the buildings and whatnot that were all built in his name, and whether or not they even want them here. Um, Mandalare says, if you make Yao's life difficult with new housing items, would you consider adding one of those gazebos? So Yao's life will be difficult. There's, at least from me, 130-ish new items coming from housing. This isn't including anything from our game systems team and their own reward stuff. I don't think we went very heavy on structures um, as part of that. Some of it is we want to kind of hold some things back, um, and eventually we would love to get to do an Umbar housing neighborhood, and that sort of thing feels like a great opportunity there to have housing rewards. Um, Question from Axel Mers. How does the team decide what region we're going to next? For example, how did you decide to go to Umbar right after Gundabad? So usually we sit down and talk about, the things that we want to do. In preparation for the wrapping up of the Gundabad storyline, we sat down as a team and started just coming up with ideas that we were calling campaigns. Um, you might have remembered Reninian talking in an interview at one point, our former producer, talking about how, we had come up with 16 years worth of storylines. And those were usually, those were ended up being broken out into kind of four, big campaigns, big directions that we could go, places we could go to tell stories. And um, it felt like in the things that we were talking about, there was the greatest interest in going here, in part because it's just different from where we've been before. Some of our stories we're talking, if we were talking about going to, you know, further east and dealing with the threats of the Easterlings and whatnot, like it's not that we wouldn't be able to make those places distinct, but we kind of tread those grounds before, and we think that going where we're going now is a real opportunity to present something unique to LOTRO that we haven't done yet from a building perspective, from making the landscape perspective. And that's something that we were all really, really excited about, was just being able to build something fresh and introduce new elements that we haven't seen before, new scenery assets, new structural assets, new flora and fauna. Like that is an opportunity for us to kind of be a bit wild, and I think that was really appealing to many of us on the team. Let's see as we go down. Dan the Man says, is Yao a member of the team or just a super fan of LOTRO? So Yao is the proprietor of LOTRO's main fan-based housing website. And very often it's teased that the amount of housing items that I have produced has caused him many a headache and many late nights trying to update all of his databases with all of the items that I produced. High King of Noldor says, will we be able to sail in this expansion? No, you will not. You will be able to use boat travel as like a Stable Master's analog, but it will be just a teleport with a loading screen. There are no sailing systems or boat pants, as we jokingly call them, as part of this expansion pack. We're already doing a ton, and that was just an extra step more than we really had the ability to produce. So Ivanar says, we certainly are bouncing all over the map. Extreme south at the time in Mordor, Minas Ithil, then extreme north, and now back to extreme south. Yeah, it's like we're season 8 of Game of Thrones. Just minus the dragon mounts. Norbert says, do you know if we will get lost lore here, like in the Black Book regions? I really like those. I don't believe there are lost lore deeds. It was something that we had discussed as a possibility, but I don't think those made it into the deed list for this region. Adu asks, I watched the Rings of Power show, and the Galadriel team headed up to Fordwaith, which I believe is where a lot of evil worms and big dragons still roam, and I remember the show Sauron had a fortress there before he settled to Mordor. Do you think that you could mention this pitch in a meeting with SSG to make this land playable? That would be awesome. So that's very, very far north. And as I noted a little bit, we're in the very, very far south. It's not a direction that we're looking to go at the moment. It might be a little tricky to develop too. Just dark and evil wastelands all the time. Dark and evil snowy wastelands. Not to say that we couldn't do it, but I would say that it is not a destination that we are immediately targeting for further development. All right, how big is the Umbar map? It looks quite expansive. So yeah, Umbar, if you take all of the landscapes that we've made for this expansion pack, this is a very, very substantial piece of landscape content. Between King's Gondor West, Outer Gondor, Shield Isles, and Umbar, there is a lot of landscape to tread. We've kind of continued some of the... let me run a little bit slower here. We've kind of continued the trend that we started with things like Gundabad and Before the Shadow, with just very expansive, explorable areas. You know, there will be kind of the main thoroughfare of content, but the landscape itself has a lot of just kind of open, explorable opportunity to it, which is something we're really excited about. All right, let's see. Scroll down. So on the map of Gondor, will Arid Nimrays and the White Mountains be a part of the new expansion, or is it intended to be a filler zone in the distant future? So the White Mountains, you can kind of climb up into some of the foothills here and there as part of places that we've expanded into. Farouk Sahar, for example, is a part of the White Mountains. I previewed that a couple weeks ago. But we don't have any plans for those mountain ranges to be kind of relevant to an update at the moment. We talk a lot about the, filling in the landscape kind of updates, and really a lot of our filling in is kind of looking towards filling a need in character progress through the world. And right now, our need is not really aiming in areas that would be level appropriate for something like the White Mountains. We're thinking that the next time we do a filling in the landscape kind of update, it really needs to target as a Moria alternative, or rather a Moria supplement. I shouldn't say alternative, a supplement, so that folks have something different to engage themselves in that like low 50s to high 50s range. I think that's where we will end up leaning more. Can you give us examples of new types of mobs we'll find? Crocodiles, lions, Mumakil. So I don't know that we actually have any Mumakil in anything here, but we certainly have crocodiles, lions. We've got crabs as a new creature type. There's a ton of just different variations. We've got pirate goblins, pirate orcs. There is, giants and troll, or I think there's like a one-eyed troll kicking around. We're introducing rocks as well. I don't know specifically where everything is. These areas are actually not the areas that I've built. I was focused on Outer Gondor. So a lot of this is me walking around and exploring through the space as we go. As we go through. So let's see. Soft Snake says, all right, let's see if I can find it. Druid's Fire says, wait, was that a canal like Venice? There are definitely canals and different waterways throughout the city here. It is a coastal city, so it kind of makes sense. As we get closer to the coast, because we're kind of up in the higher quarters of the city, as we get closer to the coast, you'll be able to actually see things like shipyards, with ships being built and whatnot. One of the things, too, that is going to make Umbar kind of stand out, Umbar Bahar Bell stand out, is that aspects of it, portions of it, are going to be treated like monster camps. So it is not going to be just a city full of NPCs. Right now it's a city empty of NPCs because we haven't done the version of the build that I'm doing this preview on is not a version that has those NPCs put in it yet. So there will be sploosh. There will be NPCs, static NPCs for decoration purposes, as well as town services and whatnot scattered throughout where it's appropriate. But there are also going to be areas of the city that are, somewhat aggressive towards players, with Corsairs and Umbarim who do not take kindly to visitors. But we are working to make sure that those areas where they do exist are not as overtly aggressive as a normal monster camp. You can walk in and, get the stink eye from the people within the alleys that you're walking into or into the courtyards that you're walking into, and kind of have an opportunity to just like slowly back out. Or you can just Kool-Aid man your way in, and there you go. All depends on what you want to do. Let's see. Are there any plans to make additional collection tabs for wardrobe or housing items? There are carry-alls, but with constant additions for those items, it would be feasible to just select an item from this. So we've talked about things like new collection panels, but I don't have any updates I can give you on those. Those also aren't my area to really talk about. Let's see. Will Umbar be a friendly hub? So I think I answered that a little bit. We didn't want to make Umbar just a completely aggressive place. Will J-Jax return in this expansion? I'm not sure. That's a content question. And let's see, go down here. Ties in the Hut says, this doesn't even look like LOTRO. It looks like a new game. And I think that's part of why we really wanted to go. I think that speaks to why we wanted to come here as our next destination. Because it's an opportunity for us to do something new and different that we haven't done before. Present landscapes we haven't done before. Present cities in a way we haven't done before. One of the things that's like, kind of amusing is we... often when we're decorating cities and whatnot, we have our stable of like the Rohan provisions that we use. And for here, and those are a lot of it is crates and barrels. And for here, we made a very like distinct choice to like minimize our crate usage and maximize our things like baskets and bowl usage. Um, embrace the baskets. But yeah, this is feeling great. I love how it feels. I was in here trying to put stable master routes, but the city is just like so complex and so rich that trying to build the stable routes in here would have just ended with lots of horses bouncing off of walls here and there as they were trying to take a corner too hard. Nanaris says, "Do you plan to have more clutter across the city, as you have in the cities of Amphalos and Penthgallen?" Yes, that's all in progress. Like I said, this will feel a lot different as well once we have like our static NPCs, our color NPCs hanging out in here with clusters of people. You know, deco is not just baskets and wares and whatnot. It is people are deco when it comes to building cities as well. And that's certainly something that once those are placed, that'll change the feel of this space. Let's see. Druid's Fire says, "I really appreciate the fact that while there's Gondorian stuff as expected, this feels new and fresh with all the new assets we haven't seen before. It's nice to have such a major change from the same old scenery." Yeah, I mean, one of the drawbacks of spending so much time in Gondor-focused stories or dwarf-focused stories is you do end up having a lot of very similar-looking experiences from region to region. And that's not to say that once we have this expansion pack out the door and we start building towards our next region, that's not to say that that won't happen there as well. It's not to say, like, as we head further inland, that experience is going to exist as well, where you're going to see more of this. But the idea is that it's fresh, it's new, and it's okay for us to have kind of more of that showing up. This is easily one of I think this makes the mark as the biggest city in the game, but it's a very different kind of city too. Where, I think we look at things like Minas Tirith. We started the game with Breland, Breetown, and that was the city of the game. Like even Rivendell didn't really have the same kind of city feel that Breetown had. And then we introduced things like Minas Tirith and Pelargir and whatnot, and those cities, all kind of had a similar feel to them. And now we're building something that's very different here, something that's bigger, sprawls a bit more, acts as kind of a region to itself. It's not it is not a POI necessarily. Well, I mean, it is a point of interest, but it is not a POI in the sense that it is a single landmark that you go to and visit. It is a whole like region unto itself, which is really interesting and exciting. Incorporating the monster camps, I think, into the city, I think, really changes what it means to be a city. So let's see. Druid's Fair says, "Can we see the Coliseum if that's what it is?" We'll get there. I'm kind of slowly working my way around through things. So question from Dew, Thorin's Hall is beautiful, but do you think it will get a remastered Thorin's Hall like we did in Moria, or could we just expand it to tell new stories? And what was the reason to redo Moria from the old Moria? What was wrong with it that SSG wanted to change it? So Thorin's Hall currently is a dungeon interior, and there's definitely value in having it be a dungeon interior. There are aspects of dungeon space that are beneficial for certain performance things. Let's take a quick look over here. This is a nice view too. So there are benefits to it, being a dungeon, but I think there's also an appeal to having it be on landscape because there are other things that you can do on landscape that are just easier to do in landscape. You know, for example, the terrain texturing that we have going on here is like a few different layers of terrain texture creating something interesting, whereas a dungeon space is usually just a like flat static platform, and it's really hard to get kind of modeled detail into that, like modeled texture detail into that sort of thing. So that's definitely a reason to be interested in converting it over to landscape, but not so interesting that it is a high priority for us to do so. Um, as far as old Moria versus new Moria, well, the original Middle Earth Online Moria was all dungeon interiors, dungeon cell meshes. That's what it was, and while we could have built that, it wouldn't have made it feel quite as grand as building it on landscape. So Ray Bayer says, doesn't climate and geography influence city development? I'm not sure what that comment is in reference to. Um, so Norbert says, so the city has different districts. Yes, it does. I think there are 7 total districts in here. There will be, like landmarking and wayfinding to help kind of guide you through them. Also, each district has its own set of music by our wonderful Bill Champagne. We're currently working on getting volumes set up so that we can use the music to really help denote when you are in different districts. Let's see if I can catch up on some questions here, because the chat has scrolled a bit faster than I was anticipating it to. And it looks like I skipped a bunch of stuff, so we'll go down through. Let's see. Soft Snake GR says, will there be new skybox for Umbar, or is it going to be the Gondorian blue skies? So there will be new skybox assets for Umbar. It's starting to get dark again. There will be new skybox assets for this region, not necessarily specific to Umbar, but for this region. That will be mostly different clouds to kind of really sell kind of a difference in space. All right, let's see. Dan the Man says, very excited for the expansion. Does the team think this is a somewhat risky expansion, given it is being an exit from the usual scenery environment most people are associated with LOTRO? I'm sure most players are excited, and I wonder if there will be a small amount who are turned off given the new direction. So, to be completely honest, I think this is a less risky expansion pack than Before the Shadow was. Before the Shadow was a very, it had its risks because it was a new player experience focused expansion pack, and not necessarily, or rather, new character experience expansion pack, because new players to the game are more likely to pick the game up and play it for free, and then decide later whether or not they want to buy into the expansions. So Before the Shadow was riskier in that sense. I think with this, the risk is much lesser, because it's just we know what we're building here. Oh, hey, one of my vendors. I think it was one of my vendors. Is one of my vendors? Oh, it is. Yep. Look at all of those housing items. Oh, so many housing items. So many, and that's not all of them. Oh, look at that. There's some more stuff in here to see too. So many vendors are going to go into the city. So let's see. Zeus Pawner says, will there be crafting stands that are new and different added with the new expansion pack? So I kind of scrolled through them quickly, but our housing furniture over there did have some crafting stands on them. We've also got brand new like artwork for the craft facilities just in general for these regions that you'll be able to see and interact with. So let's see. Is Umbar the biggest city built? Yes, I believe it is. We'll be getting the Colosseum shortly. So the Arbiter asks, what inspired the designs of these buildings? So these buildings are all kind of inspired by buildings that we found through research in the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern. More so the there's a little bit of Moroccan here, there's a little bit of Turkish here, so there's hints of inspiration from a variety of different cultures spread throughout all of this. The ruined Temple of Sauron. Let's see. Can chickens go to Umbar? I'm sure they'll be able to go eventually. I don't know if we have any plans for it yet. So we're almost done with this, and I haven't even explored all of the city. There are still bits and pieces. I know people want to see the Colosseum, so let's make our way up there. And I'm glad these stairs are here so I don't have to rocket jump my way up. So Frizzardo says, is Umbar the name of the city or the name of the realm the city is part of? So we are in Umbar, specifically on the Cape of Umbar, and the name of the city, our in-game terminology for it is Umbar Bahar Bel. I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, but the letters work. The letters are all there. All right, let's see. So we are here at the Colosseum. So there will be an instance associated with the Colosseum. I'm not going to go into the Colosseum, and I'm not going to go into the details of the instance itself, but the instance is going to be associated with this Colosseum here. This was inspired by the Colosseum that we had as part of the Rift Raid. The artist that was working on this, kind of rediscovered and reimagined that Colosseum for here. All right, let me find a good vantage point, and I'll run down a few of our remaining questions, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. Into the water. But yeah, no, this is a very exciting region. Like, all of this is just exciting and beautiful, and I'm thrilled to see how this is all turning out. It looks amazing. All right, we'll hang out here, and I'll answer a couple more questions. Let's see. Ponton Finberry says, will there be any new night skies? So we talked about that a little bit earlier. We've discussed it, but I don't know whether or not that is going to be happening. It's just a question that I don't have the answer for. Frizzardo says, I love the way Umbar looks. By the way, are there any plans for Emyn Muil? That's literally the only part of Frodo's journey that's left. I know it's hard to put in game considering the fact that those hills are wholly uninhabited, but there's any hope for them sooner or later. I would say the hope, if any, is later, more so than sooner, and it may likely end up being kind of a fill-in-the-gaps kind of region if we were to ever do it. But who knows, that may change as we wrap up the storyline that we're doing here and start thinking about what our next major story arc is going to be. How far after the ring's destruction is this? Is Umbar already reclaimed by Gondor, or do we need to claim it first as part of the first push in reclaiming this area? In response to that, I would encourage you to play through the epic story that has gone through King's Gondor East, and then we'll continue when this launches through King's Gondor West, Outer Gondor, Shield Isles, and to here to kind of get those answers that you're looking for. So there are a few questions in here that people are asking that I'm not going to be able to answer just because they're story-based questions. Any updates on the Weed Rod? I know it requires us to welcome Voya, but I want to be sure. Again, story question. Zeus Pawner asks, why is it sometimes blurry? That's probably more my internet connection than anything else. I'm still sorting out connections and whatnot in this new office. So if at some point the stream gets a little fuzzy, I apologize for that. I still need to like dive deep into my router settings to kind of make sure things are optimized. Let's see. Do asks, will I miss out on items from the pre-order Ultimate Pack versus if I get it for Christmas after it comes out? I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately. I would recommend asking that in a Cordovan stream or posting on it on the message boards or scouring the information that is on the pre-order page. Will there be boars in the new zone? I kind of missed the little fellas in the latest zones. There are going to be boars sprinkled throughout the various areas of the expansion pack, so don't you worry. I was really hoping to get a new boar appearance, but unfortunately we didn't have the time to make that because, as you can see, there's lots and lots of artwork. Also, and then Frizardo asks, also, do you know any what the real-world inspirations are for these parts of the world? Like the way Finnish represents the language of the Lossoth, Scottish Gaelic for the Dinlandish. I know that there has certainly been inspiration for the languages. I could not begin to tell you what they are, but I know that there is some inspiration here and there about how the words and languages for these areas have been built. But anyways, so thank you everyone. I'm a little bit over, but it's okay because this city is so big. But thank you everyone for attending this, our fourth and final preview stream of the Corsairs of Umbar expansion pack. We've been through the Western King's Gondor region. We've been through Outer Gondor. We've been through the Shield Isles, and now we have finished our previews here in the Cape of Umbar and the city of Umbar Baharbel. I'm not sure when we're expecting boar previews to begin for this, but do definitely keep an eye on social media and the message boards for announcements regarding that. And as always, thank you for being here. I'm so happy with all of your questions. Happy to be able to answer them for you, and I hope you really, really enjoyed the stream and are really looking forward to jumping into Umbar yourself when we release it later this year. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great afternoon and a great rest of your week. Next time, I'm not sure what we'll be streaming next time, but we'll figure out what our stream is for next time very soon. Have a good one, everyone.